In the quiet landscapes of the Pacific Northwest, where rivers wind through dense forests and small communities thrive in what seems like perfect peace, a terrifying darkness once hid in plain sight. This is the story of Gary Ridgway, a man who would become one of America's most prolific and elusive serial killers. Known to the world as the Green River Killer. Born in 1949, Gary Leon Ridgway grew up in a troubled home in Salt Lake City, Utah. Those who knew him during his early years often described him as quiet, withdrawn, and utterly unremarkable. He struggled in school, found it difficult to form meaningful relationships, and often just faded into the background. On the surface, nothing about his childhood or teenage years screamed future monster. But beneath that quiet exterior, disturbing patterns were already beginning to take shape. As an adult, Ridgway settled down in Washington State, building a life that appeared completely ordinary. He worked for decades as a truck painter at the Kenworth Truck Factory in Renton. To his neighbors, his co-workers, and even his family, he was just Gary. He held down a steady job, went to church sometimes, and was married multiple times. He was a father. He blended in so perfectly that no one suspected the horrifying double life he was leading. Behind this carefully constructed facade of normalcy, a far more sinister reality was developing, one that would terrorize the Seattle area for years. The terror began in the early 1980s. Authorities started discovering human remains, mostly of young women, in and around the Green River, just south of Seattle. The victims were often vulnerable, runaways, sex workers, women living on the fringes of society. As the body count grew, a wave of fear swept across the region. The media dubbed the unknown assailant the Green River Killer, and the case quickly escalated into one of the largest and most complex serial murder investigations in United States history. A massive task force was assembled. Detectives worked tirelessly, chasing down thousands of leads, interviewing countless witnesses, and creating psychological profiles of the man they were hunting. But the killer was methodical, elusive, and chillingly consistent. He seemed to operate like a ghost, leaving behind a trail of devastation but few clues to his identity. For nearly 2 decades, the name and face of the Green River Killer remained a haunting mystery, a specter that hung over the Pacific Northwest. And all the while, Gary Ridgway continued his daily life, completely undetected. He went to work, socialized with friends, and raised his son. He was hiding in plain sight. What made Ridgway particularly dangerous was his uncanny ability to appear invisible. He didn't fit the stereotypical image of a monstrous killer that many people have in their minds. He was soft-spoken, non-threatening, and plain. He avoided drawing any attention to himself, and he was cunning in his methods. He preyed on victims he believed would not be immediately missed, and he was meticulous about disposing of their bodies in remote wooded areas, making them difficult to find. In a shocking twist, investigators actually interviewed Ridgway early on in the investigation. In 1984, he was on a list of potential suspects, but he passed a polygraph test and managed to talk his way out of any further scrutiny. Without enough concrete evidence to hold him, he slipped right through their grasp and was free to continue his horrific spree. The case went cold for years. Families were left without answers, and the community lived with the unresolved fear. But time also brought progress. Advances in forensic science, specifically the revolutionary power of DNA technology, were about to change the entire course of the investigation. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, cold case detectives decided to re-examine evidence that had been painstakingly collected from the crime scenes decades earlier. Semen samples preserved from several victims were now subjected to DNA analysis, a tool that wasn't available at the start of the investigation. This time, the science was irrefutable. The DNA profile extracted from the evidence pointed directly to one man, Gary Leon Ridgway. On November 30th, 2001, nearly 20 years after the first body was found, Ridgway was arrested at the truck factory where he still worked. Faced with the overwhelming and undeniable DNA evidence, Ridgway's ordinary life came crashing down. To avoid the death penalty, he agreed to a plea deal. Terms were stunning. He would cooperate fully with investigators and lead them to the remains of his undiscovered victims. In exchange, he would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What followed were months of chilling confessions. Ridgway, in a flat, emotionless voice, admitted to a staggering number of murders. He spoke of his crimes with a disturbing matter-of-factness, describing his methods and motivations. He confessed to targeting vulnerable women because he thought he could get away with it, believing no one would care enough to look for them. He revealed a calculated and repetitive pattern of violence that had gone on for decades. In the end, Gary Ridgway was officially convicted of 49 murders. But he confessed to many more, and investigators believe the true number could be over 70, possibly even higher, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. His crimes left an indelible scar on countless families, communities, and the law enforcement officers who had hunted him for so long. In 2003, he was sentenced to multiple consecutive life terms, ensuring he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. The case of the Green River Killer stands as a haunting reminder of how easily evil can hide behind an ordinary appearance. It shows us that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look just like everyone else. But it also highlights the incredible persistence of investigators who refuse to give up, and the transformative power of science and technology in bringing long-unsolved cases to justice. Beyond the headlines, the statistics, and the chilling details of the investigation, this story is ultimately about the lives that were lost. It's about the young women whose stories were brutally cut short, and the families who were left with a lifetime of grief, searching for answers that sometimes never came. In the end, the legacy of this case isn't just about the man who committed these terrible crimes. It's about the voices that were silenced and the collective determination to ensure that they are never, ever forgotten. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into true crime history.